Hello, welcome to The Honest Wargamer. I'm your host, Rob, and today we are going to be diving into the terrain rules for Age of Sigmar 4. Now, I know before we get any further, this is probably something you're like, that's not that exciting, which is why I'm going to need you in the comments below, if you're watching this video, if you listen to it as a podcast, I know, just write a note and send it to me. I'm going to need you to leave, A, how important is terrain to you in your games? B, would you prefer terrain or a board where the scenery is really nice but doesn't really work very well, or scenery that can go even as far as being like 2D flat terrain but does work really well? What is it you're looking for from a board of terrain? I'm in a unique position. I obviously, here at the TSN Arena in Nottingham, I run events very regularly for Age of Sigmar. In fact, me and my friend Charlie, at the beginning of Age of Sigmar, kind of a bit through Age of Sigmar 3, we developed a bunch of terrain rules, which you can go and find on thehonestwargamer.com. They're all here, which used effectively keywords that we saw in other game systems, and we brought them along to Age of Sigmar 3. Now, these are rules that have been used by quite a lot of people, myself included, around the world to help develop. We even did terrain maps to help develop like a more kind of like consistent experience in playing a game. And this comes off the back of having attended events around the world, all over the world, where the terrain has really varied. It's either varied from just basically useless to impacting the game in a way which probably was derogatory to the game or like detrimental to the game. So the game, it tends to really vary between that. And I probably have in me another whole video where I talk about just terrain in wargaming anyway. And I think there's loads that we could break down. But I'm going to need your help because I need, outside of my own personal experience, what your experiences are. And then that way I can learn more and I can make better content. So please do, if you can, leave some comments. All right, so let's go look at the article about terrain. This comes off the back of a previous article that they've already made, kind of discussing terrain a little bit, which we covered. But now it's going to be even more detailed. Okay, now they've got a few pictures, but we're going to read through the article as we go. You'll find conditions for visibility and moving over terrain in the core rules, which is excellent. I'd like to say Age of Sigmar 3 had almost no terrain rules, and therefore you had these really abstracted and odd interactions where models were halfway up a tower, and all sorts of odd interactions which were bad. And therefore having terrain keywords is amazing. I'm incredibly excited. I'm so pro this. I think it's great. Okay, so models can clamber and vault over terrain features that are less than an inch or less in height with no penalty at all. This is great. As pointed out in the chat, things like fields, rivers, although it is kind of, again, pointed out by the chat, it's kind of odd that a raging river isn't going to slow the movement of your units down. And one of the really cool things about terrain I'd like to see in the future is I'd like to make them immersive. I would like them to be able to add explanation onto these special terrain features and terrains to really tell me a story, because I love doing competitive Age of Sigmar, but I like doing competitive Age of Sigmar as part of a story. And it's a battle of miniature games, and I feel like terrain, some people have referred to terrain in games before as the third person in a game. And I kind of agree with that, or the third player in a game. And so I would like to see more of that. But yeah, fields, rivers, a bog, a swampy marsh, a small path, all of these pieces of terrain that are lower than an inch can just be moved over normally without any impact to your game. Units and models can no longer finish or move mid-climb, but they can now choose to jump down from terrain instead of climbing. Landing on a lower level or on the floor, this ends the move. I think this is effectively in reference to the most popular terrain out in the world at the moment is 40k elves. Many local gaming stores, even Games Workshop themselves in some cases, use some 40k terrain in their Age of Sigmar like maps, if you will, which is kind of odd. And they end up with these like flawed or two-tier system. You know, you've got a third floor, second floor, first floor, stuff like that. And so they want to develop some rules to move between. I think this is odd. They still haven't perfected movement in 40k, the main game, or moving through terrain, most importantly. We've had the towering keyword, which was a problematic keyword in Age of Sigmar 10th edition. So they're still really trying to work out how to integrate terrain into their game system, because until this edition, so Age of Sigmar 4, they haven't done it. This is in the year of our Tree Lord 2024, they haven't developed good terrain rules. So we are 40k 10th edition, in 40k 10th edition, the towering keyword. Thanks, chat. Okay, anyway. Right, any model from the lowest clan rat to the most imposing reclusion can hide from another's line of sight by hunkering down behind terrain. This is important for combat range because you're only in combat if you're both within combat range and visible to an opponent. You cannot charge units lurking behind solid walls. Okay, so let's just quickly talk about this, because that's kind of not accurate. And again, that's written by the community article person. Here I have a piece of wall that I'm showing you. Over here, I have a unit that doesn't want to be charged, and I have another unit. What it's effectively saying is that because we've seen how charging works in Age of Sigmar, all you do is you just pick a unit that hasn't run or retreated, you roll 2d6. Roll 2d6, and then you move. If you can move within half an inch of an enemy unit, then you can fight them. What that's saying is if you have a unit that's completely behind a wall and the conclusion of your charge gets you within half an inch of an enemy, but they're still behind a wall, then the charge will not be something you can do. So it's an incredibly fringe case that they've included in the article, which is quite confusing. So I hope that kind of makes sense. Instead, what you would do, if you've got the charge distance, you would just move behind the wall and get in contact. Easy peasy, I hope. All right. The Terrain Advanced Rules module features more in-depth rules, including a table with 5 universal abilities that define what your scenery pieces do in games. And these are incredibly similar to the ones that we already have or that we wrote that are on the Honest Wargamer website. So we had Obscuring, Impassable, Garrison, and Cover. They have Cover, Impassable, Obscuring, Place of Power, and Unstable. Interestingly, Garrison doesn't seem to be in there. That's when you can get into a piece of terrain. So I'm hoping that's something that we see like in the expanded rules, because getting into a building is quite fun. Also, obviously, it's a core mechanic of how some of the other things in Age of Sigmar work. So we'll see how that does work. Okay, so Cover. What that does is you subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks that target a unit that is behind or wholly on this terrain feature, unless that unit charged or has the fly keyword. There's really 2 important points to make about this. First up, how do I work out if I'm behind? It isn't clear. So it does say this here. Cover offers you units a modicum protection unless they're fresh off a charge or flapping around in the air. And there's no restriction on how far behind a piece of intervening terrain a unit needs to be to benefit. So you could be really far behind. Now, we've talked about this in a little bit of the chat, and I'm really hoping when we see the core rules for line of sight in Age of Sigmar, it'll explain this. But I'm almost certain the way that it's going to work is on a model-by-model basis. So, if I have a unit of shooting dudes, and 5 of them can see some of your unit without looking through cover, they won't suffer the -1 to hit, but the other 5 will. Because it'll be on a model-by-model basis that you draw line of sight to the unit. It kind of reads like it's an all or nothing. Like if a single model is behind cover, then they all get the benefit of cover. But if that was to be true, then that would also apply to the obscuring rule, which means you wouldn't be able to see the unit at all. So you'd end up in this weird abstraction where one model was behind obscuring, but you couldn't somehow see the whole unit. So I really don't think that's going to be the case. And instead, I think it will be on a model by model basis. So my 5 people that can see can shoot, and my 5 that can't shoot, if that makes sense. And I hope that makes a lot of sense. But it's going to be an amazing experience having these large pieces or even medium pieces of terrain and me being, I don't know, 12 inches behind it and me like, no, can't see me, or no, I get cover. So shooting is really going to be reduced as well because cover is going to have a big effect. And also getting cover or getting obscuring is going to be that much easier to do. So pretty spicy. The other spicy bit in here, for cover specifically, is the fly keyword. Unless that unit is charged or has the fly keyword. So units that have the fly keyword are not going to be able to benefit from cover. This is obviously incredibly detrimental to individual models and units, but also in addition to whole factions like Nighthaunt, where everything can fly. So, Does this mean there are any bonuses? Well, it's kind of interesting, because does this mean that flying units are going to be able to ignore cover, which will give them the bonus? They don't get the they don't get the bonus, but they also can gain a bonus. That would kind of equal it out a little bit, because right now I'm not really seeing what the bonus is for having fly, and it feels like a negative. So that's cover. Next one is impassable. This is easy, and I would argue that almost all terrain should be impassable. However, they've come up with this really cool keyword called unstable, which I love. Okay, so impassable, models cannot move across, be set up on, or end up moves on any part of this terrain feature. This is my favorite for designing really wicked boards of Age of Sigmar terrain. Obviously, I've done loads here at the TSN Arena, and one of the things I really like to do is I basically get a bit of MDF, I stick a piece of terrain on, I build up a little bit of a diorama on the terrain, and then I'm like, that's impassable. Can't touch it, can't go near it. And that's fun. That means you can make a really evocative board, but your opponent, it doesn't mean you have to come up with weird, abstracted rules to engage with it. So that's a really good bonus. Obscuring. A unit cannot be targeted by shooting attacks if it's behind or wholly on this terrain feature unless it has the fly keyword. So again, you can't see the units, it's behind, so that's really big. So you're going to get some really big bonuses. Another key thing, change from Age of Sigmar 3 to Age of Sigmar 4, there doesn't seem to be a wounds limit on this. In Age of Sigmar 3 there is. Units with 10 wounds or less can only benefit from this. So this feels like any units can gain obscuring, which is really a positive in the game. Things like a Maw Crusher, although that's a bad example because it does fly, a Stonehorn as an example, just being shot in the first turn by units that can shoot 30 inches and could kill it in a turn, although that's fairly tough for a Stonehorn. It feels like there should be some option for them to move up the board and hide behind stuff before they start to charge. So having the obscuring keyword not be wound capped is a great change in my personal opinion, and I love to see it. Again, the fly keyword, the Maw Crusher is an example, which probably has the fly keyword. It feels like that is that's again another negative because you can be able to shoot it. It also, with impassable, doesn't say that the fly keyword is going to override that, as in fly can move over impassable, which I feel like it absolutely should, in my personal opinion. So I'm hoping in the fly keyword rules, having the fly keyword allows you to move over impassable terrain. Place of power. Heroes within 3 inches of this terrain feature can use the activate place of power ability. And we'll talk about that in a moment. And then unstable. Models can move across, and this is my favorite. This is really nice. Models can move across, but cannot be set up on or end any type of move on this terrain feature that is more than 1 inch tall. So this is quite nice. And specifically, this adds a lot of narrative for things like forests. So you have a wildwood or a forest. What this means is that you can make it so that it's obscuring and it's unstable, which it does have those keywords, which we'll look at later. And this means that you are going to be able to move through it, but you can never end on it. And that's really good. You like the I know we all love the idea of hiding in a forest, but it just mechanically doesn't really work with models. They fall over. You can't position them correctly. The trees get in the way. This is a really nice way of saying, look, yeah, you can definitely move through it, but you're not going to be able to stand on it. That means you're going to be able to create some really awesome pieces of terrain. I love that. So it's a great keyword, and I love that. Okay, this is greatly simplified from the previous, and we talked about that already. Impassable obscuring terrain present challenges for movement and visibility on the battlefield, while unstable terrain is commonly applied to anything from ruins to debris. You may clamber over it to reposition. Anyway, we don't need to read that because down here, it gives us our examples of what the keywords mean. So hills and storm vaults have the keyword cover. Very cool. Okay. Obstacles like ruins, debris, statues, and barricades have cover and unstable, so you can't stand on them. And then obscuring terrain is wildwoods and fortress walls, and they provide cover, they're obscuring, and they're unstable. And then finally, the places of power. You have the Realm Gate, Cleansing Aquilith, the Nexus Siphon, and these are cover, places of power, and unstable. So let's go look at the Activate Places of Power ability. What this does is you pick a friendly hero within 3 inches of any place of power to use this ability. On a roll of a 1, you inflict D3 mortal damage on that hero. On a 2+, however, if that hero is a wizard or priest, you add 1 to the casting rolls or chanting rolls for the hero this turn. If that hero is not a wizard or priest, they can use the Unbind or Banish Manifestation ability this turn as if they had the Wizard 1 rule. So, let's talk about this in Age of Sigmar 3 terms. Age of Sigmar 3 has a bunch of special terrain rules that you can apply, Arcane being one, which adds +1 to casting. Some events around the world have maintained and used these special rules, which is quite fun. You get to kind of add a narrative and fun keyword. This is a normal tower, but now it's a wizard's tower because it's arcane. The problem is that those are locked in with special abilities. Here specifically, the ability to get +1 to cast or +1 chant. The reason in my personal opinion, I think that's a problem, and probably something I won't use in my personal games or even at my events, is because this is quite a large buff for what is effectively just a random piece of terrain being somewhere. If you decide to put places of power or, these activate places of power pieces on the board, what you're effectively doing is giving a bonus to certain types of armies for no real reason. Those armies may really benefit. +1 to cast is a really good benefit in the game. And having that consistently is really good. Imagine a multicaster like Nagash being able to have +1 to cast on all of his spells already. It just makes the math really bad, and I think it doesn't work well. So I don't really like it at all. It's not that I don't think it's fun and something enjoyable that you could put into games, absolutely. But like I said, I would have much preferred to have seen rules for rivers and fields than I would have liked to have seen this. This, like I said at the top of the show, is because Games Workshop produce a bunch of terrain, and they really need you to buy that terrain. They don't need you to, but they want to, and they want to actively encourage you to. They want there to be some reason that that piece of terrain is slightly different to another piece of terrain. And if they make a core rule that places of power are core elements of an Age of Sigmar battlefield, then they more readily can sell you those pieces of terrain. This is a situation where function is being created around form, which is the miniatures they sell. It's the same as Wildwoods. Wildwoods are something they always have to deal with because it's something that they make, instead of just saying, like, there are no forests. But here we are. Then they show off a battle plan called Device, which is cool, and they show you what those terrain maps look like. They've got some obscuring terrain across there. Then they have 2 impassable terrain, and then they have 2 places of power, and then they have 2 more smaller area terrain or obstacles. In my personal opinion, the places of power probably shouldn't be in there, and instead I'd prefer to see them being something else. I would love to know what you think. This is your opportunity to say, Rob, I'd like to include them because it's going to add some fun narrative to my games, or Rob, actually, I can see what you're saying. Whatever your thoughts are, I think that's going to be interesting. Unlike faction terrain, which can be targeted or destroyed, which we learned the other day, which is cool, regular scenery pieces are indestructible, so you will always have to factor them in as you maneuver around the battlefield while you contend for objectives. Now, I'm actually against this, and I think I would have loved to have seen them commit with their chest about what those terrain pieces are like. I love watching people smash to rubble pieces of terrain and lifting them off the board. It makes a lot of sense. Mega Gargan runs up to a building and just kicks it over. It's thematic, it's fun, it's cool. Adding some wounds characteristic to those pieces of terrain, the normal ones, would have added even more tactical depth to the game. That would have been really fun, but there we go. There may be some cases where a unit has barricaded themselves upon a terrain feature to secure line of sight with their ranged weapons, or simply provoke the enemy with taunts. Even if there's no room for your unit to get up there too, you'll still be able to charge them so long as you end up with half an inch of the terrain feature instead, which is how it worked previously. You were able to charge garrisons or pieces of terrain where people were like on top of them, and then they couldn't charge in. I'd just like to clarify as well, because I did mention it, maybe not 100% correctly. Unstable, depending on your piece of terrain, you are going to potentially be able to put some models on a piece of unstable terrain, as long as it's less than an inch. That's actually quite abstracted. You have to get into a lot of detail about where. Coherence is going to be an issue as well, but you can technically put models onto unstable terrain. And I think I would like in the future to produce solutions for all of you on how to make better terrain. I think this is going to be one of those key things. Games Workshop make terrain for you to buy, but they don't overtly make terrain to function how you would like it to function. So I think we could do something better in the future, which is why you watch The Honest Wargamer, and hopefully support The Honest Wargamer on Patreon, which would be cool, and you can join our hot Discord community. So let me know what you think of the terrain rules. I think that they should be impactful in the game, but they should be impactful in a way that you enjoy, and they shouldn't be, and have in the past been, impactful in a way that people don't enjoy. Models halfway up buildings I've seen, and it just feels a little unconstructive. I think also, I definitely think this. I think there should be, I would say that looking at this feels like the very bare bones of terrain rules. It really does, especially when community members like myself and Charlie have already done that work before. They aren't really reinventing the wheel with many of these keywords or rules and using them to apply to their game. What I would love to see for Age of Sigmar 4 and Games Workshop and Warhammer Age of Sigmar in the future is all of those things we were talking about. Rivers, like we know what the narrative is for Age of Sigmar. What does a marsh look like? What does a river look like? What sort of special benefits they do? I would love to see like a big section of building your environment in Age of Sigmar, because I think that's one of the things that's lacking. They've done faction terrain, which is cool, so we've got some semblance of what they look like, but I would love to see these engaging kind of like maps of, if you were trying to build a Skaven stronghold, this is roughly what it would look like. You know, these are this sort of elements that they would do. Games Workshop, unfortunately, never really ever go that deep. Some people think it's because they want to leave it intentionally broad so you can make your own stories. I think it's because they just don't do the work, which is a shame because the world building for Age of Sigmar could be glorious and I'd love to see it. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Thanks very much for watching. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, and I really appreciate everyone watching it, and especially if you'd like to support us on Patreon, that'd be great. Thanks very much. See you soon.